East Elmhurst, Queens. 2:46 a.m. Sunday, February 14, 1965. The temperature hovers at 19 degrees. Ice crystals form on the windows of the modest brick house at 2311 97th Street. Inside, Malcolm X sleeps beside his pregnant wife Betty, unaware that three men crouch in the frozen darkness outside his home. They carry Molotov cocktails, amateur weapons for an amateur operation. But the message they're about to deliver will trigger a chain reaction that reaches into the heart of Harlem's underworld. The glass explodes at 2:46 exactly. Fire consumes the living room where Malcolm's four daughters had been playing just hours before. Betty screams. Malcolm kicks down the back door, herding his family into the bitter cold, barefoot on frozen ground. They watch their home burn while neighbors gather and sirens wail in the distance. 43 minutes later, the phone rings in a Harlem brownstone. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson listens to the report without speaking. At 78, his body is failing, congestive heart failure eating away at the man who once controlled every corner from 110th Street to the Harlem River. But his network remains operational. His authority remains absolute. And the attack on Malcolm X's family has just violated the most sacred rule of the underworld. You do not touch the home. You do not touch the children. Bumpy sets down the phone and stares at the morning newspaper on his kitchen table. The headline reads, "Malcolm X House Bombed." To the public, Malcolm is a controversial political figure. To Bumpy, he is still Detroit Red, the sharp-witted hustler he knew in the 1940s before prison and the Nation of Islam transformed him into something else entirely. The bombing represents more than an assassination attempt. It signals that Malcolm's enemies believe they can operate with impunity in New York City. They believe the old rules no longer apply. They believe Bumpy Johnson has grown too old, too sick, too irrelevant to matter. They are about to learn the cost of that miscalculation. Within 6 hours, Bumpy will make 3 phone calls. The first activates his street captains. The second reaches his informant inside Mosque Number 7. The third goes directly to Malcolm, requesting an immediate meeting. Bumpy intends to offer the kind of protection that the NIP refuses to provide and the FBI is too busy undermining to care about. He intends to place a ring of steel around the minister. But there is a variable that Bumpy Johnson, for all his calculated genius, cannot control: Malcolm's unwavering principles. The refusal that is about to happen will seal a death warrant. 7 days later, Malcolm X will walk into the Audubon Ballroom to address 400 supporters. 3 men will rise from the crowd. A shotgun blast will tear through his chest. 15 bullets will find their mark. The execution will be systematic, professional, and final. In the aftermath, Bumpy Johnson will sit in his study, staring at the dust motes dancing in the lamplight, knowing that he offered salvation and watched it walk away. Some will call it destiny. Others will call it the inevitable result of challenging too many powerful enemies at once. But in the cold mathematics of the street, it will represent something simpler: the moment when principle collided with survival and principle lost. The story of why Malcolm X refused Bumpy Johnson's protection is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to February 14, 1965, to understand how a firebombing in Queens set in motion a week of violence that would reshape American history. East Elmhurst, Queens. 2:40 a.m. Sunday, February 14, 1965. 3 men step out of a borrowed sedan into air so cold it burns their lungs. 19 degrees. Ice crystals form on every surface. including the windows of the modest brick house at 2311 97th Street. They are not professionals. Their movements are stiff, their nerves raw, their weapons crude. 2 glass bottles filled with gasoline, rags stuffed into the necks like primitive fuses. But crude tools can deliver sophisticated messages, and the message they're about to send will reverberate through every corner of New York's underworld. They position themselves with amateur precision. One near the front living room window where Malcolm's 4 daughters had been playing just hours before. Another along the side of the house. The third remains by the car, engine running, eyes scanning the silent street. No police patrol, no witnesses, just frozen darkness and the promise of violence. At 2:46 a.m., the bottles fly simultaneously. Glass explodes against the windows. Fire erupts across the front of the house with a sound like tearing fabric, consuming curtains and furniture with chemical efficiency. The flames spread with terrifying speed, filling the interior with black smoke and the acrid stench of burning petroleum. Inside, Malcolm kicks awake to Betty's screams and the roar of fire. Training takes over. He moves through smoke-filled hallways, grabbing his daughters from their beds, shouting for his pregnant wife to follow. The back door sticks. Malcolm drives his shoulder into the wood, once, twice, until the frame splinters. The family spills into the frozen backyard, barefoot on ice-crusted grass, counting heads to ensure all 6 made it out alive. The fire department arrives at 2:58 a.m. Police show up 4 minutes later, asking perfunctory questions, while neighbors gather in bathrobes. Malcolm stands in borrowed shoes, his family huddled in blankets provided by strangers, and gives his statement with the precision of a man who'd been expecting this exact scenario. He doesn't speculate or hedge. He states flatly that the Nation of Islam firebombed his home in retaliation for his public criticisms of Elijah Muhammad. The officers write down his words without enthusiasm, promise to investigate, offer no protection beyond suggesting he file a formal complaint in the morning. By dawn, Malcolm stands before reporters and strips away the last veil of ambiguity. He names the Nation of Islam publicly, calling them out as the architects of the bombing. With those words, he elevates the conflict from private feud to public rupture. The background makes his accusation inevitable. 6 months earlier, he'd broken from the nation after exposing Elijah Muhammad's serial adultery. The threats began immediately. Phone calls promising death, letters describing his execution, confrontations on Harlem streets. Malcolm documented everything, requested protection. The nipped response ranged from indifferent to hostile, suggesting he was fabricating threats for publicity, assigning no officers to monitor his home. The phone call reaches Bumpy Johnson's brownstone at 3:29 a.m. His lieutenant delivers the report in clipped sentences. Bumpy listens without interrupting, then sits in the darkness of his kitchen, processing the implications. At 59, his body is failing. Congestive heart failure requires medications that leave him exhausted. His doctor has been explicit: reduce stress, prepare for the inevitable. But his mind remains sharp, his understanding of street dynamics unchanged by physical decline. The firebombing violates fundamental rules governing New York's underworld. You can kill a man in the street, ambush him outside a nightclub, arrange an accident that fools no one. But you do not attack the home. You do not endanger children. You do not create chaos that draws federal attention. The nation, in their zealous pursuit of Malcolm, has just demonstrated contempt for these principles, signaling they believe they can operate in Bumpy's territory without consequences. The disrespect is systematic. Malcolm grew up in these streets as Detroit Red before prison transformed him. The relationship between them had never been close, but it existed within a framework of mutual recognition. An attack on him, particularly involving his family, represents an attack on the established order. By dawn on February 15th, Bumpy calls his most trusted lieutenant. His voice is quiet but carries absolute certainty. They want to play by new rules in my city. Time to remind them who writes the rules. The clock starts ticking. Malcolm X has 6 days to live unless he accepts what's coming. The king of Harlem sits in his high-backed leather chair, a nitroglycerin pill dissolving under his tongue as his heart misfires without warning. February 15, 1965. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson is 59 years old, his body failing, his breath shortening on single flights of stairs, yet the atmosphere in his brownstone study carries a weight that transcends biology. By 1965, he is no longer the man stalking Lenox Avenue at 3 a.m, checking corners, testing loyalties, measuring fear. Age and congestive heart failure have extracted their tax, but Harlem operates on institutional memory, and that memory runs deeper than medical charts. The name Bumpy still commands silence in policy banks and numbers joints. Store owners who have never met him extend credit to his people without question. Hustlers born after his first stretch in Alcatraz lower their eyes when his car rolls past. The respect he commands no longer comes from visible displays of force, but from something colder, authority written into the street's operating system. That system includes Malcolm. Before the tailored suits and global headlines, Malcolm had walked these blocks as Detroit Red, a skinny young hustler with conked hair and nervous energy. In the 1940s, when Malcolm ran numbers and robbed houses, Bumpy watched him with clinical interest. Red was reckless but intelligent, impulsive but teachable. Bumpy would pull him aside and deliver quiet corrections: which cops were bought, which corners were spoken for, which arguments required walking away. It was not friendship. It was instruction from a man who understood that sustainable power must be disciplined. Prison and the Nation of Islam took Malcolm on a different road, one leading to mosques instead of card rooms, to microphones instead of alleyways. But when he returned to Harlem as Minister Malcolm X, the old underworld recognized the same sharp mind, the same refusal to be intimidated. The mutual respect survived the transformation. On February 15th, the morning after the firebombing, Bumpy moves with deliberate precision. His first call goes out at 6:47 a.m. to his most reliable street captain, a man who has survived long enough to understand that instructions need no repetition. Bumpy speaks with military brevity. Put eyes on Malcolm. 24 hours. I want to know who breathes near him. Within 90 minutes, 3 rotating observers will position themselves near Malcolm's temporary residence, documenting every visitor, every car that slows while passing, every face that appears more than once. The second call requires more delicacy. Bumpy maintains an informant inside Mosque Number 7, a man whose loyalty to cash outweighs his commitment to Elijah Muhammad's teachings. The conversation is brief and coded, but the message is clear. Bumpy needs intelligence on the nation's internal discussions, the names of men being activated for operations, the timeline for the next attempt. The informant will deliver a report by evening, risking his life to provide information that might prevent Malcolm's death. The third call is the most direct and dangerous. At 9:15 a.m., Bumpy dials Malcolm's temporary number. When Malcolm answers cautiously, Bumpy speaks with the flat efficiency of a man conducting necessary business. We need to talk. Today, your choice where, but it happened. There is no threat in his voice, just an ultimatum wrapped in courtesy. Bumpy's strategic calculation is brutally simple. If the Nation of Islam can firebomb a home in Queens with impunity, it establishes a precedent that will metastasize throughout his territory. Other groups will test boundaries, challenge protocols, introduce chaos into systems that depend on predictability. Territory requires rules. Even killing must follow protocols. You don't bomb homes. You don't target families. You don't create spectacles that force genuine law enforcement response. The nation, in their religious fervor, believes they operate outside these constraints. Malcolm agrees to meet February 18th at the Hotel Teresa. Bumpy hangs up and turns to his bodyguard, delivering his private verdict. He'll refuse the offer. But I have to make it anyway. It's about respect, his and mine. February 18th, 11:23 a.m. The Hotel Teresa stands at 125th Street and 7th Avenue, 22 stories of brick and limestone, that has hosted presidents and revolutionaries. Cold air cuts down the avenue as Bumpy Johnson arrives in a charcoal suit tailored to disguise the weight loss from his failing heart. Despite the nitroglycerin pills and doctors' warnings, he moves with calculated precision, his bodyguard trailing at the prescribed distance. Malcolm X waits near the entrance in a simple wool overcoat, no jewelry, no affectation. The contrast is deliberate. Bumpy dresses like armor, Malcolm like credibility. They walk through the lobby without speaking, past a desk clerk who recognizes both men and discovers urgent paperwork requiring his attention. The hotel restaurant occupies a corner of the ground floor, morning light filtering through tall windows. Bumpy selects a booth in the back corner, positioning himself with sightlines to both entrances. Malcolm slides across from him. Coffee arrives untouched. Bumpy lights a cigarette, smoke curling between them like a physical manifestation of the conversation's stakes. Bumpy speaks first, his voice carrying the flat efficiency of a business proposal rather than a lifeline. He offers rotating bodyguards drawn from men who have protected numbers runners for decades, who understand how to read crowds and neutralize threats before they materialize. Safe houses scattered throughout Harlem and the Bronx, locations known only to his inner circle. Intelligence on Nation of Islam movements, courtesy of informants who report directly to him, information the night he cannot or will not provide. The resources remain formidable despite his semi-retirement. His men do not hesitate when orders are given. His weapons do not miss when fired. His information saves lives by identifying threats before they become executions. Malcolm listens without interrupting, fingers interlaced on the table, expression revealing nothing. The internal conflict is visible in the set of his jaw. He understands the value of what is being offered and the cost. His organization of Afro-American unity is barely 6 months old, built on principles of black self-determination. Accepting protection from Harlem's most notorious crime boss would compromise that mission before it truly begins. His enemies would weaponize the association, painting him as a hypocrite who preaches moral authority while hiding behind street muscle. The philosophical clash sits unspoken between them. Bumpy believes in by any means necessary as survival doctrine. You use whatever tools preserve your life and territory. Morality is a luxury purchased with security. Malcolm believes in the same phrase as liberation theology. The means must serve the ends without corrupting them. Violence may be justified, but it must be principled, not criminal. Malcolm explains his refusal with careful precision. He speaks of faith over fear, of trusting divine will rather than street power. He acknowledges the danger but argues that accepting protection would undermine everything he is building. His words are respectful but final. This is not negotiation, this is explanation. Bumpy's reaction contains no anger, no attempt at persuasion. He simply nods slowly and lights another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. The silence carries the weight of mutual understanding between two men who grasp power through entirely different frameworks. Bumpy sees Malcolm's refusal as noble suicide. Malcolm sees the offer as a cage wrapped in silk. They stand and walk outside together. The handshake on the Hotel Teresa steps lasts 3 seconds, firm but not aggressive. Malcolm turns and walks south down Lenox Avenue, his overcoat catching the February wind. Bumpy watches until Malcolm disappears into the crowd, then turns to his bodyguard with instructions delivered in a voice empty of emotion. Pull everyone back. He's made his choice. Now we watch what happens next. The Nation of Islam in 1965 operates through hierarchies engineered to insulate leadership from direct culpability. At the apex sits Elijah Muhammad, whose authority flows through ministers and captains down to the rank-and-file believers. Violence never arrives as explicit orders from Muhammad's mouth. Instead, directives filter through layers of intermediaries, each step preserving plausible deniability while making the intention unmistakable. A captain mentions that a problem requires resolution. A lieutenant identifies capable men. The actual instruction arrives wrapped in religious language about protecting the nation from hypocrites and traitors. By the time the order reaches the executioners, it carries the weight of divine sanction without a single traceable command. 3 names emerge from this machinery of death. Talmage Hayer, 22 years old, is a committed member of the Fruit of Islam security force at the Newark Mosque, his background including military training and absolute loyalty to the nation's hierarchy. Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson operate out of Mosque No. 7 in Harlem, both veterans of the Fruit of Islam with reputations for discipline and controlled violence. They are not fanatics driven by religious ecstasy. They are soldiers following orders they believe originate from the top of their command structure. Their recruitment happens through careful vetting in quiet rooms, away from official mosque business, framed as a necessary act of spiritual defense. All 3 have been molded by years inside the nation's structure, trained to accept that enemies of Elijah Muhammad are enemies of God. Surveillance of Malcolm intensifies immediately after the February 14th firebombing. The watchers document his movements with methodical precision, noting his speaking engagements, his temporary residence patterns, his refusal to vary routine despite escalating danger. Malcolm maintains his schedule with fatalistic consistency, appearing at planned events, walking predictable routes, conducting meetings in public locations. His refusal is both principled and tactical. He will not allow fear to dictate his movements or validate his enemy's intimidation. But this predictability creates operational opportunities for men planning his death. The decision to strike at the Audubon Ballroom crystallizes during the week of February 15th. Malcolm has scheduled a rally for Sunday, February 21st, and the venue offers everything the assassins need: familiar layout, minimal security, crowded space, multiple escape routes. Meanwhile, fragments of the plot leak into Harlem's intelligence networks. Bumpy's informants report unusual meetings, the movement of weapons, quiet intensity among certain Fruit of Islam members. Street sources whisper about Sunday, about the Audubon, about making an example. The information lacks precision but carries unmistakable menace. Bumpy dispatches intermediaries to warn Malcolm through his remaining allies. The messages are consistent: Sunday is dangerous, stay away from the ballroom, the threat is immediate and organized. Malcolm receives these warnings with polite gratitude and firm dismissal. He thanks the messengers but makes clear he will not alter his schedule or accept protection. His faith demands he continue his work regardless of threats. The nation's operatives note this crucial development. Bumpy Johnson's protection has been offered and refused. The shield has been withdrawn. The path to the target is clear. Saturday, February 20th, 10:17 p.m. 3 men gather in a cramped Bronx apartment where the heating barely functions and the air smells of gun oil and nervous sweat. Talmadge Hayer sits at a kitchen table with a sawed-off shotgun, checking the breech mechanism, loading shells with practiced efficiency. Butler and Johnson field strip their 9mm pistols, ensuring no mechanical failure will compromise tomorrow's operation. The conversation is minimal, professional, focused on logistics rather than philosophy. Hayer breaks the silence with clinical finality. Tomorrow afternoon, it's finished. Across the city, Malcolm sits in a borrowed bedroom, reading bedtime stories to his daughters, his voice calm despite everything burning around him. Betty stands in the doorway watching her husband perform this ritual, fear carved into every line of her face, knowing, tomorrow, he walks into the Audubon ballroom and no one can stop him. Sunday, February 21st, 2:05 p.m. The Audubon Ballroom at 166th Street and Broadway fills with 400 supporters, their footsteps echoing against ornate ceilings and worn carpet that speaks to decades of community gatherings. The venue carries anticipation mixed with unease, the firebombing 1 week earlier still fresh in collective memory. What strikes Bumpy Johnson's observers immediately is the complete absence of police presence. No uniformed officers at the entrance, no plainclothes detectives scanning faces, no security protocols beyond Malcolm's small volunteer team. This vacuum of official protection is either bureaucratic negligence or calculated abandonment, and either explanation leads to the same lethal conclusion: Malcolm X is completely exposed. At 2:50 p.m., Malcolm arrives through a side entrance, moving through the crowd with practiced grace despite the circumstances closing around him. He shakes hands, exchanges brief greetings, his smile genuine and his voice calm. He shows no visible fear, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that this might be his final public appearance. The crowd responds to his presence with energy that borders on relief. Their leader has not been intimidated. What they cannot see are the 3 men already positioned with surgical precision throughout the ballroom, creating a triangular kill zone that covers the stage from multiple angles. Talmadge Hayer sits 15 rows back, his overcoat concealing the sawed-off shotgun that weighs heavy against his ribs. Norman Butler and Thomas Johnson occupy different sections, their 9mm pistols hidden but accessible, their eyes tracking Malcolm's movements with professional detachment learned through years in the Fruit of Islam's security force. At 3:05 p.m., Malcolm steps to the podium. He begins with the traditional greeting, "As-salam alaikum," his voice carrying the authority that has made him one of the most compelling speakers of his generation. The audience leans forward, absorbing every word about the Organization of Afro-American Unity's mission, about international solidarity, about the struggle ahead. 4 minutes into his speech, the distraction unfolds exactly as rehearsed. A man near the front suddenly shouts, "Get your hand out of my pocket." The accusation triggers immediate confusion. Heads turn. Malcolm's volunteer security moves toward the disturbance, their attention diverted from the stage at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. Talmadge Hayer rises from his seat. The sawed-off shotgun emerges from his coat with practiced efficiency. The distance is less than 20 feet. Malcolm turns toward the commotion just as Hayer fires. The blast is deafening in the enclosed space. 21 shotgun pellets tear through Malcolm's chest with devastating precision, the impact lifting him backward. His hands reach instinctively toward the wounds, fingers grasping at torn fabric and destroyed tissue. Before he can fall, Butler and Johnson stand simultaneously, their pistols extended, firing with systematic discipline. The 9mm rounds find their marks in rapid succession, each shot calculated, each impact driving Malcolm further back. The execution unfolds in front of 400 witnesses, yet the speed and violence paralyze most into frozen observation. Malcolm collapses to the stage floor. Betty rushes forward, throwing herself over her husband's body, cradling his head in her lap while blood spreads across the wooden stage in an expanding pool. The ballroom erupts into screaming chaos. Hare attempts to flee but is shot in the leg by one of Malcolm's security team, then beaten and captured by the enraged crowd. Butler and Johnson disappear into the pandemonium, their escape aided by confusion and the absence of any organized security response. The ambulance arrives at 3:17 p.m., 12 minutes after the shooting. Malcolm is transported to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, arriving at 3:24 p.m. Despite desperate medical intervention, he is pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. The autopsy will document 15 separate gunshot wounds, a clinical catalog of systematic execution. That evening, Bumpy Johnson receives the phone call in his study. He listens in complete silence, his face revealing nothing. He hangs up without speaking and sits motionless for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Finally, he turns to his wife with words that carry the weight of absolute finality. "They killed the best of us. And I let it happen." The investigation begins before Malcolm's blood has dried on the Audubon stage. Police move with bureaucratic efficiency, arresting Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson within days, based on witness testimony that will later prove catastrophically unreliable. Talmadge Hare, captured with a bullet in his leg and the murder weapon, confesses his role but insists Butler and Johnson were not involved, that the actual accomplices escaped into the chaos. His testimony is systematically ignored. The prosecution needs defendants, and 3 black Muslim men satisfy the narrative. Witnesses, traumatized and confused, provide identifications that contradict each other on fundamental details, yet somehow converge on naming Butler and Johnson as shooters. In 1966, the trial proceeds with mechanical inevitability. Despite Hare's repeated statements of their innocence, despite lack of physical evidence linking Butler and Johnson to the crime, despite conflicting testimonies, the verdict arrives with crushing finality. All 3 men are convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The case is closed, the file sealed, justice officially served. But history has a way of leaking through cracks in official narratives. Decades later, documents emerge revealing the extent of FBI surveillance and COINTELPRO operations designed to neutralize black leadership. Evidence suggests law enforcement possessed advanced knowledge of threats, yet took no protective action, creating conditions where assassination became inevitable. The revelation is not direct FBI participation in the killing, but rather calculated abandonment. A decision to withdraw protection and allow enemies to collide. In 2021, 56 years after the conviction, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office moves to exonerate Butler and Johnson. The admission confirms what Harlem whispered for decades: 2 innocent men spent their lives in prison while the real conspirators remain protected by institutional corruption. Bumpy Johnson lives through Malcolm's death carrying knowledge that corrodes him more effectively than heart disease. He increases personal security, surrounding himself with bodyguards who understand their primary function is preventing the boss from dwelling on failures. His health deteriorates with accelerating momentum. Nitroglycerin pills multiply. Doctor visits become weekly rituals, but physical decline is secondary to psychological burden. On July 7, 1968, Bumpy collapses at Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue while eating breakfast. He dies before the ambulance navigates 3 blocks through Harlem traffic. The king of Harlem falling in the heart of his kingdom at age 62. The funerals occur 3 years apart but mirror each other in scale and significance. 20,000 mourners flow through Harlem streets for Malcolm, weeping for the loss of a prophet. Thousands attend Bumpy's service, understanding an era has ended, that controlled order is about to fragment into chaos. The contrasting legacies are stark yet complementary. Malcolm leaves an intellectual revolution. ideas about black consciousness that will fuel movements for generations. Bumpy leaves a power vacuum no successor can fill with equal authority. Within months of his death, heroin floods Harlem with unprecedented volume. The disciplined criminal structures he maintained collapse into chaotic violence, replacing his regulated brutality with indiscriminate destruction that will consume a generation. The final irony binds both men in death as it never could in life. Malcolm and Bumpy died trying to protect competing visions of black dignity. Malcolm pursued moral authority, believing righteousness would shield him from evil. Bumpy wielded controlled violence, convinced power respected only force. Both were correct. Both were insufficient. At Woodlawn Cemetery, they rest miles apart, connected by that February morning conversation when protection was offered and principle refused. The haunting question persists. If Malcolm had accepted Bumpy's shield, would he have survived to see his vision realized? Would his message have been compromised by association with the underworld? History offers no answers, only cold mathematics. Principle, however noble, stops no bullets. Sometimes the most dangerous decision is refusing devil's protection to preserve angel's purity.